Okay. At this time, we are going to see my project, which is called Beyond the Power of Your Mind. So, this work is for the literature aspects, and we are going to work together and trying to get some ideas, focusing on trying to understand how literature may involve our life within many different contexts in such as history, for example, or in your personal lifestyle. For that reason, it's super important the way in how you can develop, for example, an idea of your mind and how you can spread a clearly enough message to persuade someone to believe you. For example, here is my questionable part that I am going to propose for you, which is mainly focusing on how can we explain being a hero from the old literature perspective to nowadays worldview. I wrote here another personal like analysis in which we are going to discuss about and we are going to write. Okay, so it doesn't matter how brave you are, because at any moment everything can be taken out of your hands. I do think that it's a clearly enough viewpoint trying to give you information about what is a hero, what is considered as a hero, trying to understand the main meaning of the word, and also get the specific information from literature in this case, and the history that to involve the definition for that word, which is hero. Okay, so here in the brochure that I created for you, I designed um, a picture in case that is going to show you, for example, what happened um, with literature and what had happened with it through the time. So for that reason, I decided to write about and analyze about Beowulf, which is a hero in a very old English literature. Um, he was so brave according to the facts that appear in the movie or in the story that was written after the story exists. That means that the literature at this time it was focused on oral traditions because writing didn't exist at that point. So for that reason, I'm going to invite you to analyze to see this brochure, sorry, trying to get enough information to create something new within your life. You can do it in a piece of writing. You can create, for example, an oral project, or give ideas as comments and ask questions, because I think it's one of the most important steps that a student, a learner, or even a teacher should follow when you need to learn something. So for that reason, we are going to start with the name of the project as I already mentioned. However, I'm going to start it because in this brochure you will find many verbs in which you are going to involve in a way many different thoughts, especially in three times. What happened with the oral tradition literature, what happened then with the Middle Ages literature according to Chaucer, and we are going to see, for example, some perspective about Shakespeare, or what is going on in your personal life, for example, nowadays in a more contemporary culture. So I think to start with this title, which is Beyond the Power of Your Mind, represents more than just think about a topic or try to solve some problems, because when you understand that your mind is not the only thing that exists within the world, even though it's the one that control the world for me. And I say that because I think that each human being it's part of this world, and it's human, yeah, and one of them have a mind. So I think that there is a big issue that need to be solved, but in a positive way, not in a in a deficient one. So for the reason, I decided to title my my project in that way. So beyond the power of your mind, because the idea is to get more critical thinking and try to understand everything according around our lives. So for that reason, I'm going to start with the first part, which is and the first verb, because I divided the 7 steps that is going to appear here in 7 steps. So the first one and the first verb that you're going to see as a student, as a learner, or as a future teacher, because this project is trying to involve everyone who is studying English, not necessarily in literature, but for every people who understand English or who is working with the language, trying to understand how it works through and within um, literature. So, for that reason, I'm going to start. And the first one is to organize ideas and thoughts about English literature, being part of English history, making changes between different periods of it through some authors' viewpoints. So, for this project, the idea is that you're going to understand what is the meaning of organized ideas and thoughts. Because English literature, it's something that is written um, nowadays, of course, because as I mentioned before, the interaction, an oral tradition exists before the written part. However, nowadays it's easier to get enough information, for example, about literature, about authors such as Poe, for example, such as Heidegger, or some philosopher, or Shakespeare, or people who develop their lives within literature or writing pieces of information. So I think trying to just find information, it's the first step. It's very important. However, I think the most important one is the second one. When you have already got enough information, and then you start to organize ideas and thoughts for developing something important within our project. For that, the idea is to make changes instead of just criticize, because criticism sometimes it works, is worth it. However, uh, it's not all of it. So I think try to think and develop critical thinking at this point is important, but in a positive way, as I mentioned before. Continuously, I would like to mention that this change is going to be useful in order to understand, for example, how literature function. What is the behavior of the literature? So how literature lives with our lives. So I do think that one fact that is very important, even though it's not the only one, um, is trying to make differences between the periods of literature. So for that, I'm going to give you the opportunity to choose and decide, and say, okay, I'm going to choose, for example, Shakespeare, and I'm going to talk about Romeo and Juliet, for example. I don't know, I'm inventing. And then you're going to able for trying to understand the idea of a hero, because that's the main point of this project, not the idea of love. However, perhaps it could be a good idea to make a comparison between love and being a hero. So could it may be it can be a good idea to find some similarities and differences, or advantages and or drawbacks. So for that, at this point, I'm going to just suggest to find some authors that call attention and get enough information about critical thinking and how literature works at this time in our lives. So for that reason, it's so important to start with organizing continuously. And in addition, to understand people's thoughts, mind, and their logical ideas during that time, and to learn how to acknowledge, for example, the changes of English literature within our context, such as in history, in stories, and life experience. For this project will be a great and um, utterly good contributions for people and students who are learning English. So for that, I decided to choose and put the second BEF, mainly focusing on comprehension. So in trying to understand, trying to comprehend, trying to see more beyond your your own perspective. I don't know if you understand the concept, but it's trying to go forward with the idea of literature. So for that reason, at this point, I would like to enable you and let you understand that people's thought, mind, and their logical ideas being organized first and then being understood will be the appropriate manner in which a project can be developed. So you have to be um, open mind and trying to get a lot of information from others. Try to collect specific, for example, experiences, because there you can find a lot of literature. And you're going to realize, according to my experience, that is not literature is not just something oral or something written. So I think it's go beyond that. So for that reason I invite you to follow the second objective, um, mainly focusing on understanding people, understanding who is a persona. So I think that's a very, very important point. So to continue with that, I'm going to ask you another question, but at this time, the question is not for being answered as the first one that I mentioned in the introduction. Because at this point, your project or your results should be mainly focused on how can, for example, how can we plan a step-by-step lesson to create knowledge about literature regarding the idea of a hero from the Old English viewpoint to a contemporary one? This aspect is very important because you are going to make a comparison from the old perspective, which is an oral tradition, as I mentioned from the beginning with Beowulf, and then what happened, for example, in the Middle Ages, what happened with Chaucer, with Shakespeare, and authors that you think that are interesting enough for you, and to make a contribution for our education or our life experiences according to the stories that comes from our minds. So I think that's a very good point to bear in mind. So why a step-by-step lesson? Because because the most important part is just focus in how to teach it and how to learn it. And a lesson, it doesn't mean you're necessarily, of course, that you're going to receive, for example, information from other people, like a lecture. So it's not in that way. A lesson can be something by your own, can be something taught by another person, a teacher, could be a man or a woman. So even for example, parents or or partnerships, I think, I don't know, siblings, etc., friends. So it doesn't mean that you necessarily need a professional diploma for that, or a degree. So you can do it by your own, you can teach yourself, and you can improve it anyway. Besides, something very important to bear in mind is the idea of a hero, as I mentioned, because the idea is to create a new perspective, to acknowledge that a hero is not just a man, for example, who can save a woman. So I think that's a very old-fashioned thoughts, according to my perspective. So if you disagree my viewpoint, be free to ask me, and trying to persuade myself for changing my life and my viewpoint. So for the reason, that question is, how can we plan a step-by-step lesson to create knowledge about literature? Because literature is not just, as I mentioned, something written. So it goes beyond that. I am going to repeat it for the rest of my life. For that, I'm going to go to the main purpose of this project that I created, because as the main purpose is to contribute a perspective about hero, we ought to know how it had been seen from the oral tradition, as I mentioned before, through the written one, to your contemporary perspective. So those are the three main requests that you have to include, which is the oral tradition, the written one, and the contemporary perspective. So this is one, this is two, and this is three. But why? Uh, this is mainly because um, you have to be able to understand how literature uh, travel in a way, in a metaphorical way, through time. How has boost has been boosting, I mean, um, in different contexts with different people. So because you have to understand that even though that some of the aspects of the history are going to repeat it one and over again, it doesn't mean, for at least for me as a future teacher, that it's something happen all the time. So I think when something is repeated in a way, I disagree, because I think that, okay, perhaps it's similar. Perhaps you can see some similar futures. However, at this time is happening with another kind of people, with another thoughts, with another laws, for example, something that is very important. So for that reason, I don't believe in the way that sometimes papers, articles, or books, or some authors said that, okay, history is a circle, history is like an overload, trying to get enough information for every piece of aspects of the story. So I said, okay, for me it's not exactly in that way, because, okay, even though that I think that it could be part of the development of history, I don't think that is a good idea to just bet that idea in mind. So it's it's not mainly focusing on how people behave or talk. So I think it's go beyond. I think it should be focused to on how people feel. For example, what happened with the emotional intelligence, what happened with the role of human beings in on the earth, on societies as a citizens, for example, and also as an industry, because even though that sometimes there are a lot of people that said, okay, capitalism, for example, is not an appropriate system. Yeah, in a way, it's not an appropriate system. However, we should bear in mind that it's something that moves the world. So, I mean, in this case, I'm talking about companies. I'm talking about manufacturers, for example. Not exactly in a politics party. So, following that idea, I'm going to highlight now another step that is within the full one, which is mainly the objective of the project. Because we know the purpose. The purpose is trying to change. The purpose is trying to analyze, to criticize the oral tradition, the written one, and the contemporary perspective, as I mentioned, about literature. However, the main objective that we should bear in mind is that to understand, as the second step, to understand how English had been developing through literature in history for boosting knowledge. So, what does it mean? So, for me, it means that you are going to start from one point. For example, I'm going to explain it with a metaphorical images here. So you start with one point, which is, for example, a knight, according to Chaucer, or the idea of that author. So he's a man who is brave, who fight against a beast. For example, I don't know, I'm inventing something just for let you make a bit clear, a clear idea about what is a hero nowadays. I'm trying to enable you to develop your own one. So, but what happened here? So, what happened in the process? What's the matter? So, uh, how people is going change it? Is in a line, in a straight line? Is in a following different step, as is mentioned in this one, for example. But the main problem here is that you don't know what is going on here. You don't know what happened nowadays, for example. Why a hero is not being as a woman, for example. Why you have a hero being as a transgender man or a transgender woman. So I think that those ideas that are very contemporary, are very popular nowadays, um, I think should be considered. So, and you as a learner, as a student, the same as me, trying to get some examples from your own personal life. I don't want to collect information for papers, because that is something that everyone can read it, that everyone can access to that. However, your experience make can make a grateful contribution to others' perspectives. Additionally, I think that trying to understand the concept of a night, as I mentioned before, like is here, what is happening through the time in a world that it doesn't travel in a straight way, in a straight line, what happened here, and how can you make a contribution at this point? How can you change your life with literature? How can you be part of this beautiful science? But I'm not going to, no, I'm going to retract, because it's not a science. It is more than a science. is, I think, part of our existence. It's an entity. It's a very important entity that can cover more than sciences. So I'm going to just give you the freedom to say, and the opportunity, of course, to say, okay, that's my idea, and that is something that I'm going to add to my personal project. So continuing with that, I'm going to follow the fifth step with the fifth bev, that it's very important. This is one of the most important because it's network. So apparently this bev, it has a very contemporary connotation, that, for example, it has a relationship with social networks, how you can see the world through technological devices, and how can you learn from different, um, for example, sciences, knowledge, uh, emotional aspects of life of human beings, through networking. So I think to network from different people's concepts about English literature, it's one of the most important things that we should bear in mind. So how can we do that? How can we um, be part of of a society in which you can involve your all of your feelings, all of your thoughts, all of your ideas, but not necessarily to having for having a face-to-face speech or talk. So I think that is very important to consider it. So for that, that is the element, as I mentioned, that can make a close relationship between real world and literature. But why I mention real world and literature? I'm not saying that literature is not real world. I'm not saying that literature is not real. Even though that we know that in literature you have a lot of stories, a lot of fantasy, a lot of fiction, but it doesn't mean that it's not real. I think, in fact, I think that is more real than the world that we are living now. So it's like a joke, but for me is more real than everything that I can see, because it's happening in your mind. It Literature enables you as a human being to think, to analyze, to criticize, to or to, for example, obey some instructions, some patterns, some characteristic of writers. So I think it's one of the most important things that we should be and never forget. For that reason, I have to be clearly enough in this part, because I'm not saying that this relationship is means that you're going to have a real world and then you're going to have this piece of writing. No, because literature it's part of real world and vice versa. So I think it's a complement between each other. I think it's something that we all of us can see, um, but unfortunately, uh, some authorities, and I'm going to put my personal politics party here, um, some authorities don't allows don't allow people to be free in thought, to be free in decisions, for example. But someone can tell me, okay, but why? Because you have the opportunity to think whatever you want. Yeah, I know, I can think whatever I want. However, I'm influence my thoughts with, for example, I publish papers, with books, with libraries, which has controlled by some companies, etc. So in fact, I give you the opportunity to think about it. I'm trying to get enough information from that. I'm not saying that you have to think as me. I'm just giving you some environment, some background in which you can say, okay, so that exists, so I'm going to investigate about it, and then I'm going to create another thing. So that's the idea. For that reason, I am always insist in the fact that you have to follow your personal experience, what is important for you, how can you develop it without considering books only. So just also consider logical ideas, thoughts, minds, emotional intelligence, etc., etc. So for that, I'm going to make another contribution. This is very personal. So because it's part of my objectives, it's part of my purpose, it's part of my idea of this project, for make some effect uh, contributions, because I at the beginning I mentioned the word change. However, at this point, we should notice that change is a bit aggressive, it's a bit violent. So a good idea is to contribute or to improve or increase or in a way up knowledge. So for that reason, I'm going to read it for you, which is the sixth step that is going to be followed. Is trying to enable the reader, in this case you, to understand my identity through literature, for example. It enables her or him to get into someone else's shoes. So why? Because sometimes you don't understand what is going on with the person next to you. So what happened with that, or how can you develop it, or how can you learn from that person? So for that reason, I'm going to say that you should consider it as as not the most important one, because you have to um, build up your own identity, and you don't have to just copy, like a copy and paste another personality or another behavior. So I'm not saying that. I'm just saying that you have to be individually, and you have to see yourself, but you also have to make a comparison and try to see more than your the more than what is happening in your life. So a good idea for that is trying to see some experiences. I'm not saying that the experiences is going to help you, but could be for someone who needs some advice. I don't know, but in theory, I think it's not in theory. Um, a human being can develop our minds as individual person, as individual human beings. Um, So for that, and then a strategy to express myself is following the written style, for example, of Gabriela Garcia Marquez, who is very emotional to express an idea, so may help to think and reflect about an emotional element, a real life context, and so on. So as I'm mentioning in many times, one of the most important things here in my project, in my proposal, is to enable the students to create emotional environments, emotional contributions, together with concrete contributions, because it is not functional if you just think and feel and fall in love, for example, with your theory, but you also have to create hypotheses with final outcomes. We say, okay, this hypothesis or this possible theory could be a good idea, it's well expressed, it's clearly enough. However, I need someone who criticize mine, trying to improve it, trying to boost it. So for the reason, it's very important to just not working alone all the time. I think it's a 50% of your work, and the other 50%, no, it's not a 50 sorry, I think, sorry, the 60 or the 70%, it's part of you, and the other 30% It's part of the contributions that you can pick up from other people, from other experiences, from theory, from books, from literature, etc. For that, it's paramount at this point to consider that literature is not just a piece of writing or a piece of history or a short story, as for example Edgar Allan Poe wrote one at one point in the past. And finally, the seventh step and the seventh objective is uh, is is mainly focusing on what the project is about. So this objective based project, because as you notice I have a lot of paths in which you are going to follow a step by step ideas and start from the beginning to a high level. So is this objective based project will be a great idea for trying to get enough info, um, get a specific answer on your own regarding literature. Then you as a student, following and comprehending them, will create your own persona through the concept of being a hero, acquiring in depth within your minds. Why this is very important? Because as I mentioned from the beginning until now, the idea of a hero is the one that you um, have to uh, adapt adapt for your personal life. So understand that a woman can be a hero, uh, an animal can be a hero, uh, a soul can be a hero, an entity can be a hero, a business company can be a hero. So I do think that everything around us can be a hero and not just a man who saved a woman. For that, also something very important, I'm going to come back from the beginning, which is how can we explain being a hero from the old literature perspective to nowadays worldview? So that's the main question that you have to answer for yourself and write them down if you want, or record it, or trying to explore in another manner, because you have to also, but you don't have to, you should or you ought to consider your times and the technological devices that we have access to. So for the reason, my personal analysis that it's in that way that you have to, for example, answer your question is it doesn't matter how brave you are, because at any moment everything can be taken out of your hands. So consider that, and I'm going to share something with you that I don't know if you notice it, but perhaps is something of if you question it or ask yourself. I don't know. But anyway, I'm going to share with you, but I'm not going to give an explanation for that, because at this point, you're going to be the responsible to understand what is a hero or what is an anti hero. So, according to Britannica.com, art antihero, the definition of antihero is a protagonist of a drama or narrative who is notably lacking in heroic qualities. So, analyze, for example, the picture that is behind the definition. I'm not going to tell you anything. However, the picture can tell you a lot of information. Also, at this point, the I'm going to explain the way in how the brochure was created, because I noticed that for someone can be attractive, um, can be very colorful and very catchy. So for the reason, I'm going to explain that each of the colors that I decided here have a purpose. For example, using from the first part, which is here in purple and pink, with a mix, with a hybrid of the two colors, like in between a violet or a pinkish color. So here you can see how, for example, you can mix, you can organize, you can understand, you can and then you, for example, can give clearly enough ideas and concepts about something. So for that reason, I decided to choose that color, but not exactly because it's pink or violet, I think. But because I think it's catchy, it's attractive, and you can get, and you can be more enthusiastic to read it. And also, according to the title, obviously I highlighted, because according to a design that I decided, I said, okay, I made up my mind, and I'm going to put this like a triangle square. It's a bit weird the way in which it's drawing. So I decided because it's beautiful. It have a very um, smoothie perspective. So I just say, okay, this is can be worth it to put it behind the title. And that's because I do like it. In this part, I don't know if you can understand, for example, metaphoric ideas about the color. However, for me, light blue, it's very powerful. It's beautiful. It's inspirational. Inspirational. Um, it's it's kind. It's great because it's like a light. It's like the sky. So as its name, so light light blue or sky blue. So I think when you look at sky and you see stars, you can reflect, you can think about, you can think of someone, for example. So for the reason, I decided to square this question, this reflective question, using that color and that kind of effect. um, According to this picture, obviously I wanted to represent what is Beowulf, because if you don't know, for example, the story of that beautiful and, according to my perspective, afraid hero, I think it's a good idea to represent how it's represented. And also behind the purpose of the project, we can see a picture mainly focused on knights fighting between each other, because for apparently in all English history, that's the way of a hero was seen. For me, it's awful. I have to say it, and I can't keep it off the record. But it's because I don't think violent or fighting between each other can be the solution. However, I have to tell you that nowadays contemporary people also fight, but using language. But I think it's a more sophisticated one, and it's beautifully delightful. Also, something that I would like to highlight, for example, is the way in which I decided to square the sixth one. I put it in that way just mainly, I don't have a purpose here, just mainly because it have a relationship in colors between the the third step to the first and second one, because as you notice and as you can see it now, here for example you can see pink, and the same as here, and the same happen here with sky blue and here. So it's let's the like a relationship between colors, and that's it. So thank you so much. That is my presentation of the project, and I do think that it's going to work and be clearly enough. And if you have questions, obviously you can ask me, and don't hesitate to do it, because it's part of the process of learning. So thank you so much.